Chapter 10, Psychosis Part 1-2. Although the military and the police took people and tossed them here for this arresting operation without taking follow-up steps, this didn't mean that they completely wiped their hands clean of the matter. They were monitoring the room this whole time, and they were monitoring the vital signs of each and every person. Currently, they discovered that Li Zhucheng had entered a state of shock. Only then did they adopt emergency measures. The armed mechanical soldiers were stone cold and heartless toys to the bone. They were unable to understand everything that had developed thus far, and could only see things in black and white. They followed their strict and fixed programming, and directly opened fire with their anti-riot guns. High-pressure pulses enveloped the entire room. Every person standing became an attack target. Even Lion Yu and the other girls were unable to escape it. An electric current accompanied the pulse, piercing through the body. The current ran through the nervous system of the human body and formed a closed-loop circuit. It stimulated the muscles, causing the bodies to enter into a violent and stiff state in an instant. None of the people had any sort of resistance. They fell in a wave of painful agony. The chaotic situation was swept calm in an instant. Wait, there was one person, Luo Nan. He had been restrained by the group of rich kids at his waist and legs. Perhaps it was due to the many layers of flesh acting as a shield that he was able to unexpectedly prevent himself from immediately falling down. He staggered a few steps and barely kept his balance in the end. His body was half bent over. His hands were propped against his knees. His calves seemed to be trembling, rocking, and swaying. He could fall to the ground at any time. But Luo Nan continued to stand, even though his condition was like this. He slightly lifted his head. The blood-red glow on his face had subsided a bit, but his eyes were fixed. His eyes traversed through the fence of the detainment room and lay fixed on the gun muzzles of the armed mechanical soldiers. The armed mechanical soldiers fixed upon their sole target without emotion. Just when they were about to unleash another attack, a soldier wearing combat gear burst in the room. It was a captain. At ease squad. The armed mechanical soldier's electronic eyes promptly turned to an idle black upon receiving the voice command. The captain's gaze swept through the room. He spoke strictly. All must lie down on the ground and put your hands behind your heads. He never said there would be any consequences if one doesn't follow his orders. Yet none of the people wanted to challenge his law. Even though they had yet to recover their strength completely from paralysis, the group of people still painfully got into the correct position, each one of them looking cuter than a lamb. Lion Yu snuck her head up, and she casted her vision towards Luo Nan. There should be a lot of people acting like her who strongly felt that this dark and ruthless pervert would be obstinate till the end, that he wouldn't comply with this captain's order. But they were extremely taken back from reality. Though Luo Nan moved slow, he still lay on the ground with extreme compliance. His hands intersected and hugged the back of his skull. Since Luo Nan had moved a few steps previously, he was now at a somewhat closer position to Lion Yu. Lion Yu could directly see the side of Luo Nan's face from her angle. He seemed to be trembling. It couldn't have taken him until now for him to understand fear right. An unending chant. A minute sound traveled to her ear. BZZZ, 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 BZZZ. The sound was like the flapping wing of a bee that brought a faint tempo with it. The source of this sound was none other than Luo Nan. Only now did Lion Yu discover that although Luo Nan was laying on the ground, his posture was a tiny bit different than the other people's. His chin pressed against the ground, and he looked straight ahead. His lips slightly opened, revealing the source of the bizarre sound. That form was simply a venomous wasp with a broken wing struggling on the ground. Has this fellow gone mad? Lion Yu felt a cold shiver and grit her teeth in secret. She cursed at a certain person located several hundred kilometers away. Zhang Yingying, you son of a B*TCH. What kind of people are you associated with? Zhang Yingying obviously wouldn't reply. However, the military made a quick judgment. From Lion Yu and the others' perspective, the reason why the armed mechanical soldiers and military personnel had appeared in succession was because the situation had turned big. They didn't know what sort of punishment they were to receive. But in the eyes of the military, any small counterpoints argued from facts and testimonies by this group of temporarily detained youngsters amounted to nothing but shit. In the end, the military was only helping the police out with administration. It wasn't necessary for them to waste their energy on the surface. The final thing they did was lift the unconscious Li Zhucheng to the hospital. Then they took Luo Nan, who was incompatible with the others, and put him in solitary confinement. No one opposed this judgment in face of the military. There wouldn't be any point even if they did oppose it. Actually, when Luo Nan spoke in a low voice while he was being brought out from the others, "There's still my notebook. Come on, come on." The eyes of Lion Yu and the others bulged wide open. They looked to see how this super-hidden pervert would reveal his vicious and wild side. However, they were fooled by the development of the situation once again. The captain didn't get angry. Instead, he hinted his subordinate to enter the room and retrieve the notebook. The captain flipped a few pages to take a look and saw the cracks on the flexible screen. He swept a glance with his two eyes and then handed the notebook back to Luo Nan. Luo Nan did not speak any more words. He followed obediently under the escort of the soldiers and left. He maintained a calm and collected silence from the beginning until he left, giving off the same impression at the beginning. Then during this time, when Lion Yu and the others looked at each other in dismay, Luo Nan was brought into a solitary holding room. This location wasn't too far away from his previous site of imprisonment. The space here was cramped since this was a proper solitary holding room. Only a single metal chair had been placed in the room, and this chair was fixed to the floor. If one were to orbit around the chair in a circle, he would pretty much take up the rest of the space. This place was a claustrophobic's worst nightmare. Luo Nan was apathetic towards it. He sat on the chair and subconsciously placed his notebook on his knee. First, he wiped the footprint mark from the cover, then he gently and carefully opened the notebook. Portions of the metal binding rings of the notebook were somewhat deformed from being heavily stomped and ground by Li Zhucheng. The opening tab wasn't that responsive as well. But these kinds of damages did not amount to much when compared to what happened to the flexible e-ink screen. It was unknown where Li Zhucheng drew his strength. The extremely pliable and tough flexible screen had fractured with over 10 fine lines. Some lines ran through the entire screen. It seemed that if Li Zhucheng used a bit more strength, the flexible screen would have shattered into pieces. However, the flexible e-ink screen could still be used in this state. The screen lit up with a light swipe. Luo Nan felt a bit at ease. He didn't care about anything else. He then directly opened his most commonly used drawing application. Soon, he entered into its typical interface. The sketch of the burning wraith appeared on the upmost layer. It looked to be quite normal. Luo Nan let out a long, hushing breath. His finger long pressed so he could enter into the next layer's interface. But before his exhaled heated breath could even change in temperature, the flexible e-ink screen darkened and automatically shut off. Not a hint of light remained. It was like an ominous plate that had been painted inky black. Luo Nan tried many different methods to restart the screen, but he was unable to get a response. He sat dazed in front of the pitch-black shattered screen. The minicam in the corner locked onto Luo Nan's stiff and deadpan face and transmitted the scene to a different room on the warship. In this room, the freshly minted lawyer Zhang Yingying had rushed over travel-worn. She faced the relevant people in charge of the warship and presented legal documents. This time, Zhang Yingying had changed into an old-fashioned gray-black woman's suit. Her hair was coiled into a bun. The only bright color on her body was a gorgeous sapphire blue scarf around her neck. Oh, there was also her pair of slim and slender calves that were directly exposed to the air. They were completely flawless. These calves, supported by black suede high heels, had an exquisite texture and a jade-like glow. And the person answering Zhang Yingying was the warship's logistics manager. This commander was somewhat stout and carried the last name Lu. He had received a greeting from Zhang Yingying beforehand, but when faced with this young and tender girl lawyer who was dressed up to look mature and was suspicious no matter how you look at her, he didn't have any intention of investigating her deeply. Of course, the reason probably had something to do with his eyes continuously glancing downwards. Chapter 10, Psychosis Part 2-2. Although Commander Lu was somewhat frivolous, he had already acquired the habit of caution from doing logistics work for a long time, so he had some hesitation towards the current situation. There isn't any problems with the others, but this one kid Luo Nan is truly a bit suspicious. He's so young. How could his hand be so fierce? His behavior, after what transpired, was bizarre as well. Zhang Yingying replied completely seriously. Having this sort of thing happen is truly regretful, but in my opinion, this was a small conflict caused by the impulsiveness of being hot-headed. It won't hinder the judgment of this case itself. Of course, the military is only temporarily responsible for detaining these youths. We won't make a statement on this incident. Commander Lu spoke, putting the matter to the side. Soon he revealed a smile. In accordance to orders from higher in the chain of command, Luo Nan's batch of people still need to wait for their investigations to be completed. We still need to conduct screening and establish records. It should take about 8 more hours at the very least, during which we won't permit them with any contact with people on the outside. You've come early, Miss Zhang. The coffee in the officer rec room is said to be quite good. Why don't I invite Miss Zhang over there to kill a bit of time? Zhang Yingying's eyes didn't even blink once when faced with this tactless and crude pickup technique. She directly refused. No, that's not necessary. My client has the miserable look of despair and apathy. It would be better for me to keep a close eye on him. Commander Lu shrugged his shoulders. It should be because his flexible screen is broken. It should have some special significance for him. For instance, it could be a gift from his father or something like that. Zhang Yingying raised an eyebrow. A gift from his father? What good thinking. Commander Lu was a bit taken back when he was met with the rejecting signs by this young female lawyer, but he still revealed forth a smile for the sake of his objective. He spoke showing off in the sort of clear, yet not clear philosophical manner. Adults need to cautiously decide on allowing weak justification. The number of kids who are laid back are plenty. They could suffer setbacks at any time, but they can bounce back quickly. This is because they're still under the protection of their family. Their fathers quickly compensate for it. When my client was 4, his father threw him to the ground, smacked his butt, and disappeared. Was this another rejection? Commander Lu was rather embarrassed for a while. He slipped away crestfallen and unwilling. While in this state of confusion, he actually met with Zhang Yingying making a big thumbs up towards him. Therefore, I need to say this. Mr. Commander has quite the excellent intuition. Zhang Yingying's forefinger and thumb pressed to form a ring. Her other fingers sliced through the empty air. Did you know that the flexible e-ink screen was a product that emerged 60 years ago? That there are approximately 200 different brands in total, with over 3,000 products. However, my client's screen isn't a model that could be found on any market. Commander Lu's mind was a foggy mist. It was great just to be able to chat with this beauty. He did the utmost to get the gears in his head turning. It was personally made. That's right. My client's father was one of the best industrial designers. He worked in manufacturing in Quantum Corporation and had outstanding creative work experience across 2 departments before retiring without a trace. He created this gift as a present for his sole son. There's no present as fitting as this. Commander Lu performed a rough assessment. In other words, that screen has at least 12 years of history to it. Tusk. But I need to say this. It would be very hard for you to use this reasoning to ask for a higher compensation due to damages. Zhang Yingying chuckled. Naturally, she wouldn't give Commander Lu further explanation. In reality, she had already obtained the data on the flexible e-ink screen display and had already performed a more meticulous analysis when she was in the office. Although Luo Nan's flexible e-ink screen was not a product that could be found on any market, it still required manufactured parts. For example, its super thin panel was part of the Medusa series that hit the market in the year 2090. From this, she could prove that the earliest timeframe in which Luo Nan could receive this gift was in the 90s at the earliest. In other words, it was highly likely that Luo Nan's determined to be missing or even dead father still maintained contact with Luo Nan in the 90s. Maybe that was all there was. The year 2090. The matter with Yan Hong also happened in this year. There was also Quantum Corporation's Burners, Deep Blue platform. There were many pivotal events. Zhang Yingying stared at the monitoring screen at that taciturn and stiff big boy. She suddenly really wanted to know what had happened on a certain day in the year 2090. At that time, Luo Nan would barely be 10 years old when he would receive that present from his father, whose location was unknown. What kind of emotions did he go through? Was he reminiscing right now? The display of the monitor wouldn't be able to broadcast Luo Nan's inner thoughts, but it did broadcast Luo Nan's bodily movements perfectly clearly. After a long period of sitting in silence, Luo Nan finally made a new movement. He stood up, placed the broken notebook onto the chair, and strode a step towards the door. From this distance, Luo Nan could stick his forehead to the thick and ice-cold metal door with a slight leaning of his body due to the small size of this space. He maintained this position for several seconds. He could be seen performing a few deep breaths in this time period. So far, Luo Nan's actions were quite understandable. He was doing his best to maintain a calm state of mind. But Luo Nan's next action made people quite bewildered. Luo Nan slightly moved back on the display of the monitor, adjusting his distance. His line of sight remained facing the metal door from start to finish. He concentrated with all his might. It was as if what was in front of him was an unparalleled and exquisite work of art. He closed his eyes a full minute later, reaching out with his hand and letting his fingertips slip across the surface of the metal door. He felt from here to there. This wasn't the end of it. His fingertips streaked to the corner to touch the metal-plated walls, and he continued with his preceding action. And just like this, Luo Nan walked in circle after circle in this cramped room. His fingertips stroked on the metal walls, forming continuous invisible linking traces. What's going on? The inexplicably bizarre change caused Commander Lu to be a bit dizzy. Zhang Yingying didn't reply. She just looked on with complete interest. This lawyer was intoxicated. Fine, Commander Lu felt that things should be put to a stop. After all, Luo Nan was only a minor. What if he really was traumatized and was stifled to madness? His military career would completely dry up if the media were to report this. He hinted to his subordinate to prepare measures of intervention. The closed room had a sedative mist spray installed and prepared to prevent enclosed people from getting mental breakdowns or even perform self-mutilation. But Luo Nan stopped his footsteps at this moment. It was as if the previous events hadn't happened at all. He picked up the notebook from the chair and sat as before. He flipped to a blank page in the notebook and whipped out the digital pen. He removed the inductance tip to transform the pen into a fluorescent pen that could be used to write on paper. The tip of Luo Nan's pen fell onto the paper under the astonished gaze of Commander Lu. He drew out crisscrossed, fine, and muddled lines. His pen moved exceedingly fast to draw in an expertly minimal manner. After a few breathing techniques, an approximate outline appeared on the paper. Commander Lu indicated to the monitoring camera to zoom in. Then he was met with the lined sketch. It appeared to be a building. There was quite the detail to it, even though it was just a sketch. For example, there was the enclosed fence, the thick walls, and the narrow windows. All these combined with other details to give one an intense impression. This was a prison. Only the configuration as a whole had a certain unnatural misalignment to it. It was as if it contained a sort of force that can intervene between the material and the intangible, causing this building to become warped and twisted. Commander Luo looked half understanding, half confused. Then a sound came from the side of his body. He twisted his head to look, and was met with Zhang Yingying gazing fixed at the monitoring display. She tapped the floor subconsciously with her foot. Her expression was that of unparalleled concentration. Oh, maybe this little Miss Lawyer wouldn't react if he were to reach out with his hand and grope her perky butt. Chapter 11, Self-Portrait, Part 1-2. Luo Nan didn't know that there were people paying close attention to each of his actions. Even if he did know, he wouldn't exert extra effort to take this under consideration. His state was really bad. Hunger, pain, numbness, hallucinations. These were negative elements that had existed in him. Under the passage of time, they could only increase in severity, not lessening in the least. And they even gradually began to converge together to form a poisonous flame of corrosion. Every organ, the hundreds of bones, and every part of his body was spurred by an invisible force to shift around erratically. This so-called invisible force was none other than the apparition that Luo Nan had discovered through the means of visualization. This apparition was now no longer the size of a mosquito. It spurred the poisonous flames to flow deep in Luo Nan's flesh. It constantly consumed Luo Nan's energy and essence to grow and strengthen. And it continued to exert more and more disturbance towards Luo Nan to form a type of near-blocking effect. Every time Luo Nan tried to meditate to enter into his fixed space and look into the origin of the apparition, he was disturbed intensely on a physical and even mental level. Even just a whistle would become a strong explosion. If things were to continue like this, Luo Nan would be eaten alive by the apparition sooner or later, even if he were to take only into account the mental cost and biting recall from failure to enter the fixed space. And all this time, the apparition was also trying to influence Luo Nan's state of mind. For instance, when he had applied a fatal mental suggestion in the conflict with Li Zhucheng, when he was about to kill Li Zhucheng, a clear reverberating echo of what seemed to be the apparition's hissing laughter echoed in his ear. His thread of sanity had truly just been a small distance away from snapping. Luo Nan remembered when his hand was stuck to Li Zhucheng's throat. Li Zhucheng's fear and despair melted into his flesh, blood, and energy to converge into a surging wave of heat that entered rushing and bubbling. However, the surge that passed through his body was doomed to be impure. Not only was he unable to utilize it, it even swept away some of his own energy. No known tracks remained, but it was quite obvious where that energy went in the end. The apparition utilized precisely this method to grow and strengthen at a rapid pace, squeezing upon Luo Nan's space of existence step by step. Naturally, Luo Nan's current state of mind wasn't too great. But upon analysis, this sort of state of mind consisted largely of a certain disturbance of his past memories. Even the deep sunken dregs of his horrible experiences floated to the surface. He was quite resentful, just now because his notebook, fine. Because of what happened to his flexible e-ink screen, he had flown into an enormous rage. He should not have done that. Though he kept the flexible e-ink screen by his side for 5 years, he had already become accustomed to forgetting everything that was unpractical and useless. Yet where in the world did that ruthlessness and impulsiveness come from? And after the event, how did such an absent-minded mood billow out? Could it be due to the gene from a certain individual, hidden deeply in his flesh and blood? From that coward, hard. How ironic that the apparition's active disturbance would actually give Luo Nan quite a good explanation for what happened. So much so that Luo Nan actually felt a bit at ease. Everything was due to the apparition. Then things would be rather simple. Indeed, the blocking type of disturbance from the apparition brought a great deal of trouble. But why did he absolutely need to use that sort of brute force method of butting heads and spilling blood? Luo Nan had entered into his fixed space in hopes of drawing support from that state in order to make a step forward in breaking the apparition, in touching the apparition, in seizing the apparition, in annihilating the apparition. The blocking and disturbance from the apparition had, on the contrary, verified that his line of thinking was correct. The apparition should be a strand of tendon from Luo Nan's analysis, and he did not necessarily need to channel his fixed space in order to discover a piece of information. Luo Nan had a certain simpler method. Using a pen, using a piece of paper. He had collected many subjects as source material over the past many years. He had drawn quick sketches of the surrounding scenes countless times on the spot, seizing the characteristics of his subjects. Perhaps his pen and paper skills have yet to reach mastery, but his skills have long since reached first class in terms of speed and accuracy through practice. Right now, what he needed to do the most was to draw a special self-portrait. Lines flowed out from the tip of his pen onto the paper, piling up into layers and intersecting one another. His mind was a blur as he was both concentrated and relaxed. The pen flowed quickly to a near uncontrollable direction. In a certain sense, drawing was more liberating than using the visualization technique. Although the visualized diagram seemed to come into existence from nothing, in reality, the procedure was very strict. Luo Nan needed to maintain relative harmony between his body and mind. He could not be carelessly excessive nor deficient. However, the quick sketch on white paper was different. It was based off of substance, yet it could also separate itself from reality. This style of drawing could be made up of mostly imagination, fantasies, and symbolics in order to describe a certain idea or concept. It was a complete creative liberation. Back in the day, his grandfather could use hand-drawn pictures to depict the marvels of formatting theory. Luo Nan of the present could use a similar method in order to describe and explain the changes that happened to his body. As this change was being drawn onto the surface of the paper, one could even speculate what would play out and read a step ahead. A small rough draft to what would be a grand work of art was formed. And so Luo Nan drew a prison that could never exist in reality in order to symbolize the most prominent thoughts of his present mind. This was the first time Luo Nan had been detained and imprisoned for all his life. It was a new experience. He automatically made a connection with the leading clause of the 20-word mantra. My heart's a prison. Luo Nan was confident that the 20-word mantra was some kind of interpretation made by his grandfather about formatting theory. The words prison, furnace, lens, nation, and so on were direct formulations of the levels of formatting theory. From this sequence, Luo Nan could extrapolate that the prison format was perhaps the advanced stage of the vessel. Therefore, he used the ice-cold and cramped confinement room as a reference in order to draw freely and flowingly. He plucked and selected his intermittent bursts of inspiration. He was like an energy machine too wonderful for words. He constructed his personal marvelous building on the paper. He obviously knew that the majority of the building's composition drawn was fantasy. He might not be able to utilize it in formatting, but it would be enough as long as he had that trace of inspiration. The distorted scene was even easier to explain. This was because his drawing reflected reality. The force that constructed the distorted building came from within himself. That formless and traceless apparition was the start of it all. He could not see the apparition, but he could indirectly experience its existence through the means the drawn, distorted scene. The number of elements that appeared under his pen increased. The self-portrait grew closer to reality. At the moment, the tip of Luo Nan's pen and Luo Nan's thoughts were mixed as one. It was as if they were indistinguishable. No distinction could be made. The visualized world of the void was like a picture scroll that unfolded in front of Luo Nan once again. The silver threads of the tetrahedron, the inscribed sphere, the circumscribed sphere emerged clearly. It coincided with the prison on the paper to form a spectacular picture. It didn't matter that he was unable to enter into the fixed space. He could make the fixed space appear here. In truth, the emergence of this picture proved that Luo Nan could eliminate external disturbances to his state of mind, so the actions of the apparition also became meaningless. The tip of Luo Nan's pen did not cease moving. His soul had truly returned back to the fixed space. The apparition, which had been continuously disturbing and destroying, was caught off guard. Its crafty form appeared at last. The outer space of the visualized diagram was originally an empty darkness that permeated into the other colors. It was a sort of oppressive crimson color like that of struggling flames that had yet to perish amongst the ashes. The apparition permeated and blended mutually, with the darkness to combine and form a fuzzy and indistinct silhouette. This thing moved within the darkness, sticking to the visualized diagram, trying to invade inside, and it had already infiltrated a portion of itself inside. If it was anyone else, they would need to spend some time to find this bordering monster. But Luo Nan was able to identify its form with just a glance. The burning wraith. It was none other than the faint mass of a wraith from the earthquake in the R&D district. It had nearly took Luo Nan's life with a hissing shriek. Then it had concealed itself amongst the void to be difficult to pursue. Luo Nan even left its image within his drawing software. If he had not made an annoying encounter with destiny, Luo Nan would already be on campus, referring to materials and striving to discover clues of the wraith. He never thought that this fellow would actually force him into this state, roaming around within his consciousness, melding his flesh and blood together. Luo Nan's pen didn't cease moving. However, his lips hooked into a light smile. Hey, he smiled, he smiled. Commander Lu cried involuntarily and immediately felt an extreme level of shame. He felt he had absolutely been infected by Luo Nan to make such a fuss over nothing. Zhang Yingying was also extremely curious about Luo Nan's present state of mind. Unfortunately, the monitoring display was destined to be unable to sense Luo Nan's thoughts. But on this side of the monitor, beeping notifications rang forth. The large door opened, and someone walked in with large strides. Zhang Yingying's interest changed directions, and she was met with someone wearing well-ironed, slim-fit sky-blue clothes. This person did not wear any military rankings. This person appeared rather out of place amongst this room filled with deep space gray military uniforms. Commander Lu turned to see this new arrival, his eyebrows slightly creased, but soon he put forth a smiling expression. He faced forward with a step and spoke with laughter. Assistant Yan, how goes the ongoing search below? Chapter 11, Self-Portrait Part 2-2. Assistant Yan didn't respond immediately when faced with Commander Lu's pleasantries. His line of sight swept to Zhang Yingying to the side and stopped there for a moment, perfectly meeting Zhang Yingying's gaze. This assistant Yan was approximately just over 30 in age. His medium height didn't reach Zhang Yingying, who was wearing high heels. On the other hand, his body deposition exuded vigor and strength, and his facial features were rather handsome. The only thing was that he had the habit of pursing his lips, resulting in a cold and solemn expression. He appeared hard to talk to, and what gave people the deepest impression were his eyes. Their pupils brought with them a slight color of crimson. The surrounding eye socket also exuded with a similar color. Most notable were the veins and blood vessels, the interweaved together in the vicinity between the corner of his eyes and his temples. It gave quite an uncomfortable feeling. Commander Lu saw that these two were mutually sizing each other up, and he did nothing to introduce them to each other. He opened his mouth once more, turning the focal point back to him. Assistant Yan, is there anything you need my help with? In accordance with orders from the command, I've transferred over the detection equipment from my company in order to conduct screening on the temporarily detained suspects aboard this ship. Assistant Yan's face was expressionless as he directly manipulated his wristband. He faced Commander Lu with an indication, soon passing an identification authorization. Detection equipment, Commander Lu spoke inquisitively. The search below has concluded. Not yet. However, the precision needs of the equipment are relatively high. Installation and calibration will require some time. Understood, understood. Commander Lu was somewhat regretful. Since he was the one who received the equipment, he needed to act as person responsible for it. He absolutely needed to be present. The amiable conversation with this young lady lawyer had to come to an end. He indicated to Assistant Yan to wait a bit, and he turned to face Zhang Yingying with a smile. Miss Zhang, let us conclude here for now. It's still early. I'll arrange a room for you. First, take some rest. I will arrange for someone to send you the materials you have requested. Thank you, Mr. Commander. Zhang Yingying knew that it wouldn't be proper to stay idle by herself within the monitoring room. She took the initiative to extend her hand to clasp with Commander Lu for a premature farewell. As Zhang Yingying laughed amicably as she passed by Assistant Yan, slightly squinting her eyes. Actually, she had activated the automatic recording feature of her contact lenses, saving a picture of this person's face as a souvenir. The corner of Assistant Yan's mouth spasmed. It was unknown if this was a response. His vision did not linger on Zhang Yingying. According to his angle, he was facing towards the monitoring display within the room. Zhang Yingying glanced back as soon as she left the room. Commander Lu could be considered to be quite cautious. He did not want to implicate himself. He had long since indicated to his subordinates to switch away from the close-up of Luo Nan. Right now Luo Nan's figure had already vanished from the dozen or so similar displays on the monitoring screen. It wasn't too surprising, but Zhang Yingying had a certain intense feeling. This Assistant Yan's vision was focused straight towards Luo Nan, and he had been staring fixed at Luo Nan for a long time without moving. Zhang Yingying inputted the picture she snapped into a database as she walked down the interior corridor of the warship, setting in fixed search conditions. From his uniform he should be of sky blue security, the underlings of Quantum Corporation who specialize in the company's security. The fact that he was able to directly communicate with the military shows that he should have a high position. Also, there was his pair of eyes. A warning sounded several seconds later. Requested material is classified as secret. You do not have sufficient privileges. Zhang Yingying wasn't especially shocked. She switched to a different information channel with only a slight twitch of her mouth. Not much time passed before she selected and retrieved a simple personal record. The reason why this was simple was because a portion of the record had been blocked and erased. However, she could already verify a portion of her hypothesis from the material available. On top of the record was a digital picture. The appearance was none other than Assistant Yan, however he was younger by 7 to 8 years. He was displaying a lofty and soaring smile. Yan Yongbo, former Acumen College instructor, retired in the year 2090 on his own accord. His father, former Acumen College instructor Yan Hong. Well then, what a fine example of a destined clash between enemies. Let's see, has he recognized Luo Nan after all? Zhang Yingying made another mental connection to the dialogue she had with Zai Junping before she had boarded the warship. She was forced to make an amendment at this moment. The giant machine that is Quantum Corporation wouldn't care about a tiny ant. But this may not be the case for a spider or something similar that crawls atop of it. This appeared to be a very troublesome choice. Should she give up? A thought spurred an action. Beneath the tip of Luo Nan's pen emerged a fantastic drawing that also circulated within Luo Nan's mind. Yeah, very cool. The very cool Luo Nan was still drawing the picture. Even though he had entered into the fixed space, even though he was locked onto the source of his disturbance after verifying the identity of the apparition, he never had the thought of stopping. This feeling of convergence between his intentions and his pen was truly quite wonderful. The burning wraith was a certain existence that was unfathomable. Luo Nan did not know how he should classify and qualify it. Even though he had entered into the fixed space, he did not really have a clue on handling it. But when he gripped the fluorescent pen, when he let the lines flow from the pen's nib, all his problems were no more. The material and the spiritual, reality and the imaginary, the present and the future, several dimensions interweaved together from several angles. Together, they described the same target. His insight wouldn't be exhausted no matter what happened. That twisted thing had its conceptual clues appear clearer and clearer on the sketch of the prison building filled with symbolic meaning. Luo Nan unconsciously opened his mouth into a tiny slit. He mouthed the long-ripened mantra, selecting only the first clause. "My heart's a prison," he spoke to himself without a sound, and the thoughts he had during execution had previously never congealed to this present level of solidarity. They even pierced through the boundary between reality and the imaginary, forcing itself into the visualization plane. It was as if his thoughts embodied as an iron mallet that pounded heavily onto the visualized diagram. Like the toll of a bell, like the striking of chimes, countless silver threads disengaged themselves from the diagram amidst the fine vibrations. The threads split and randomly collided to form the composition of a myriad of flashes and sparks. And it was quite clear that this composition possessed a close corresponding relationship with the prison building on his notebook. Part of it was clear and proper, part of it was warped and indistinct. There was a great disparity within its form. Within it was a closely woven fence, a confined iron cage, jumping electric arcs, malevolent photon guns. In short, every article, every item was violent to symbolize the power of enforcement. The symbolism was embodied into the fine details of the prison sketch. His pen went according to its own wishes due to leaps of consciousness. The majority of the structure was specious and did not conform to the fundamental principles of the composition. Their existences became extremely short-lived. Every coil and knot that was shattered from the silver-threaded structure permeated into the burning wraith within the visualized diagram's internal plane. Actually, when this wraith faced its great enemy, it moved about unceasingly in resistance with a rather sorry appearance. The burning wraith wanted to continue executing its destruction and disturbance. But the problem was that the course of assaults launched simultaneously in multiple dimensions had already completely encroached upon its scope of control. Luo Nan did not know why, but this overbearing, over 100 feet tall burning wraith howled to the sky. What sort of setback had it experienced? The wraith was this overwhelmed, but Luo Nan wouldn't stop now. The chanting didn't stop, the visualization didn't stop, the pen didn't stop. Gradually, Luo Nan ceased pouring details comprised of inspiration into the sketch. Instead, he began to subtract. Clues to form the core principle became clearer and clearer, granting him power. It seemed as if those jumping compilation of silver threads in the visualized diagram also responded to the pure and intense thoughts of his mind. Hundreds of flashy constructs collapsed with an explosion. The simple and pure structure of the tetrahedron was exhibited once again. A crashing sound rang forth from the core of the inscribed sphere located dead center within the diagram, causing his heart to seemingly shake and tremble. The burning wraith lost the will to continue on in face of this change. The glowing flames curled up within the darkness and broke away from the visualized diagram, transforming into a red ray of light that shot off into the distance. But where would it go on the visualization plane? Before this thought left his mind, the empty world was in turmoil once more. The red ray seemed to penetrate into an incorporeal veil. After a moment of sluggishness, it increased its speed to pierce through the void and leave. Luo Nan's consciousness was suddenly dazzled upon the piercing of this veil. The ice-gold metal wall and the notebook placed upon his knee actually appeared in his field of view, and he could also see his own self drawing with the pen. Chapter 12, Out and Opening to Roam as a Soul, Part 1-2. An out-of-body experience. It was as if the Luo Nan was watching a supernatural film right now. However, before Luo Nan could determine whether this soul-leaving technique was a good or bad thing, the burning wraith's red ray had already pierced through the wall to disappear without a trace. Oh, disappearing wouldn't be an accurate description. This was because there still remained a difficult-to-describe, yet clearly recognizable response that emerged in the bottom of his heart, marking the location of the burning wraith. Luo Nan knew the cause of this. Although the drawing beneath his pen was nominally a self-portrait, in reality, the descriptions of the state of his body and mind were encompassed within. Naturally, his drawing was also comprised of the burning wraith. Yep, the wraith was the unnatural warping within the sketch of the prison building. Right now, Luo Nan's visualization and his drawing had already fused to one. They were hard to distinguish. It would be impossible for any clues left on the drawing to not leave traces in his mind. And Luo Nan was stimulated into another burst of insight from the sudden fleeing departure of the burning wraith and the change in motion of the disturbing force. His main body actually didn't stop drawing under this inexplicable and ineffable out-of-body state. Although further details were unable to be crammed within the notebook's drawing, this burst of insight had already gushed forth. It was unstoppable. With a strength that seemed to pierce through the paper's surface, the pen drew tangled, coiled, and intertwined lines in the meagersome white space surrounding the drawing. The conceptual clues continued to strengthen. Finally, it formed from the molding of insight with a vibration. It was like crack. Within the visualization plane, within the breathtaking resonance, a giant crow weighed down by heavy chains came to being at the core of the visualized diagram. It was like a praying python. It suddenly moved, probing with its long body. That incorporeal veil had just been pierced. Now it was torn apart once more. The shackled crow smashed and broke through the void to enter into reality. It followed in the direction of the escaped burning wraith, piercing the air to leave. Luo Nan didn't know how long the chains were. The front half had already broken through the void, and the part within the core of the inscribed sphere had yet to reach its limit. Perhaps length fundamentally had no meaning on this plane. This technique was instantaneous. Luo Nan heard the sharp cry of the bird. The shackled crow brought his heart to make contact with the violently scorching burning wraith in a flash. The shackled crow's power was swift. It had actually bore a hole through the wraith by force. Countless silver threads immediately burst and split, coming and going. They interlinked to rigidly lock the burning wraith in place. Captured. Although there was only a millisecond of delay, Luo Nan still could not taste the scent of victory. An enormous force pulled via long chain to fiercely affect his body. The burning wraith also didn't know where it drew its strength. It was like an enraged boar that madly charged forward, pulling the chains without caring and in spite. Luo Nan was unable to control the mad charge of the burning wraith. Even his main body trembled under the effect, taking some kind of hidden force. He only felt his entire body go light. In reality, the crisscrossed form of the visualization underwent a rapid change. The surroundings of the confinement room was substituted and re-represented by the composition of every room, corridor, and machinery of the warship. This time his soul really was outside of his body, and he was forcefully dragged from his body by the berserking burning wraith to travel and pass through walls. What's this? The physical laws of the spiritual plane. At first Luo Nan was pondering whether or not someone would be able to see this unscientific scene. But soon he was sure that the coming and going soldiers, officers, and mechanical AI on the ship were completely ignorant of the chasing scene above their heads. The tightly guarded transport ship had been completely reduced to a defenseless horse racing track. At least things were this way at this moment. It must be stated that this was quite the new kind of experience for Luo Nan. Luo Nan gave observing the current state of his existence a shot, and he arrived at an initial conclusion after a great deal of effort. The appearance of his soul form was quite approaching that of the burning wraith. He just lacked the wraith's oppressive dark crimson flames. He was more like a shadow of the void. Luo Nan wanted to continue observing this experience in detail, but a chilling sense of feeling increased in intensity after the passing of an unknown amount of time. It was simply due to the crimson ray's body that blasted wildly within a world of ice and snow. A cold wind of brutality cut like several blades upon his body. This incorporeal frigid wind was absolutely unavoidable. His soul within the void didn't experience a blood-splattering effect, but the intense feeling of pain was completely real. It was quite clear that the situation was heading towards a dangerous incline, and it was quite evident that this was closely related to being dragged into this out-of-body experience. Luo Nan's first thought was to immediately return to his body, but right now his mind and the chain were in coexistence. They were bound to the burning wraith, and he was completely confused on how to unbind himself, on how to separate himself. Times of increasing confusion calls for an increasing need to move to action. Luo Nan performed 3 actions in this life-threatening situation. First, he made a comparison. What was more painful, the frigid wind cutting his soul or the psychotropic drug composition cutting his neurons? Verdict, it appears, there wasn't much difference. The second, he made a confirmation. In the end, was there still a link between his main body and his soul? Verdict, his main body was quite in pain over yonder. The third, he raised a question. Since there existed a link between his soul and his body, where was this link? Verdict, only one thing was known. The link existed upon the visualized plane and the sketched drawing, although this answer was somewhat of an abstraction. The first verdict enforced his belief. The second verdict clarified how things worked. The third verdict gave him a method. His staunch belief transformed into a rippling sound of chanting at this very moment. As before, the leading claws exploded and cried forth on the visualization plane and within his soul. My heart's a prison. The visualized plane was drawn and blended together with the sketch just as before. A messy and clearly new layer of the prison building was formed between reality and imagination. The building seemed to be constructed like reality as layers upon layers were laid, enveloping Luo Nan's range of perception like dark clouds. The out-of-body soul appeared to be far from the main body. In reality, the soul was still within the scope of the prison building. And the burning wraith was likewise. The heavily chained crow shuttled crisscrossing within what seemed to be the imaginary prison, forming support posts, thick walls, a prison, torture devices. And at this moment, Luo Nan truly understood the nature of what this heavily chained crow represented. There would always be an entity to enforce the rules, no matter the prison. Its enforcement power would certainly be top-notch. It's needed to have the strength to punish when faced with a disobedient prisoner. The burning wraith appeared to have evaded to the distance, but it would inevitably suffer a merciless suppression as long as it didn't truly shed the binding chains that trap it. In an instant's time, the heavily chained crow vibrated with a cry that executed Luo Nan's will. The deeply accumulated force within was finally unleashed. The coalescence of his thoughts and insight caused every silver strand that formed every locking ring splitting from the heavily chained crow to become entwined with Luo Nan's soul. This action was tantamount to piercing and binding the burning wraith from inside out, roping and winding the burning wraith in, and even performing a direct slice of analysis on the burning wraith. A great quantity of information was fed back, with not enough time to sort it. The burning wraith hissed with pain, yet no sound waves rippled. Instead, spirit waves diffused into the surroundings, containing what seemed to be actual substance. It seemed as if this painful state was way too intense. The lighting along the walls of the long corridors of the warship suddenly went dark. Then the entire row of red alarm lights lit up. Sounds from tangible and intangible alarms ran through the entire space of the ship. Warning, warning, a mutant has infiltrated the ship. Repeat, a mutant has infiltrated the ship. Class 3 mutant, Darksider life form has appeared. All routinely armed personnel enter combat POSITIONS. Prepare SCDATIVES. All mechanical AI enter standby mode. Launching the deep blue platform. Burners entering emergency state. Chapter 12. Out and Opening to Roam as a Soul, Part 2-2. Within a short several-second time frame, the dark red alarm light spread a grave and pressing atmosphere to every nook and cranny on the warship. Although such situations were rare, the military always had procedures in place to follow. It would be enough for each system and each branch to just adhere to orders. The problem was that there were non-military personnel aboard the ship at this time. In Zone C of the transport ship, engineers from Quantum Corporation installed and calibrated equipment. They suddenly went stupefied from the ringing alarms. They stopped their handiwork, looked at each other in dismay, and were clueless on what to do. The supervisor present, Commander Lu, had the highest military ranking. He also had sufficient experience. He immediately said, "All non-combat personnel cease your work. Be on standby at your current location. Wait for further instructions." After temporarily placating the people's moods, Commander Lu rushed to contact up the chain of command, verifying the situation. He had just barely received clear-cut directions when he raised his head to find Quantum Corporation's in-charge employees twitch. Acting security work manager Yan Yongbo sat on the edge of the construction site. He never raised his head, but he kept on fiddling with his wristband. He appeared unaffected by the external changes. "Blow you, how can you be so calm?" Commander Lu never liked these high-end mighty sorts, these fellows who think too much of themselves. He walked over with large strides and a stiff face. Just when he was about to voice out, a swift male wearing the sky-blue security uniform rushed in front of him to face Yan Yongbo. This male sought out instructions. Leader, we've entered into an emergency state. Should we warm up? Warm up, O old high. Yan Yongbo still didn't raise his head. He spoke dully. Have you thought about how the military would feel if you were to wear an exoskeleton armor and rush back and forth on the warship? You haven't, have you? Well, you can go ask Commander Lu. Commander Lu had just walked over when he was suddenly stopped by these words in front of him, weakening his vigor. Then Yan Yongbo unexpectedly lifted his head to look at Commander Lu. Your thoughts, Commander Lu? Commander Lu's pupils whipped between the corner of his eyes. In the end, he forced himself to swallow his anger. He opened his mouth with great difficulty. The orders from command state that a Darksider life form has infiltrated the ship. There is a large possibility that this is related to incident that happened in the R&D district. Quantum Corporation's burners will be participating in the hunting operation and are temporarily assigned a specific combat squad number, Squad 7. Here is the communications identifier number. Yan Yongbo received the relevant data and nodded his head. That's good. I'll take a look at these orders. However, Commander Lu, I suspect that this incident is related to the detained people aboard this ship. I hope that you will increase your surveillance capabilities in order to avoid any unexpected mishaps. F*CK, you arrogant SS. Commander Lu was in charge of operational matters, so Commander Lu finally became angered when this issue was raised. He did not feel like going through any sort of superficial motions. He twisted his head and walked away with a dark face. Yan Yonbo did not speak any further. He stood up, led Old Hai towards a different direction, and left. He transmitted some data to Old Hai along the way. I'm assuming that Moron will need some time to vent his anger. The situation won't change that much. You go wait for the chance to remobilize to Zone A2. Excessive movements may produce something unexpected if you were to happen upon this person. The data formed upon Old Hai's retinas. The delicate, pretty, and calm face of a youth appeared. Old Hai was expressionless. He just subtly nodded his head and deeply imprinted that young face into the bottom of his mind. The alarm sounds and lights continued to alert without end. The flashing dark red glows were represented by lines within the prison building between reality and imagination. They began to collapse after a flash of brilliance, soon transforming to ruin to become nothingness. After all, Luo Nan had not truly constructed a rational structure. He had implemented quite a few future concepts randomly within. It was quite the confirmation for these concepts to exist temporarily. Of course, the most important thing was that the burning wraith was completely unable to storm out at all. Crack, crack. The chained crow continued its suppression without caring for the struggles of the burning wraith. The chains that bound the burning wraith's body continued to dissect it, slice it, and perform analysis upon it. Layers of enforcement applications gradually targeted the core nature of the burning wraith. A faint bloody glow could be clearly seen circulating on the base color of the chained black crow. The bloody glow flowed in a reversing direction to kindle a marvelous heat, feeding back continuously. This heat came from the burning wraith. The accumulated information and analysis started to display their effects. Part of the burning wraith's operational mechanism of energy was decoded. The chains swiftly healed and replenished Luo Nan, giving Luo Nan further support while weakening the strength of the burning wraith. This effect was what the suddenly pulled out of body Luo Nan needed the most. Energy was poured into Luo Nan's soul like a mouthful of hot soup that flowed into an extremely starved state. Or it was like He was wrapped in thick clothes during the cold of winter. The results were instantaneous. The frigid blades of wind were blocked externally. There was even a corresponding response from his main body within the interval of 2-3 breaths. The approaching limit to the state of his hunger was alleviated completely. The situation was changing and shifting. The burning wraith changed from a madly swinging wild bull into a naughty sled dog from the large blood loss. Then it would irreversibly change into a dying dog. Luo Nan was greeted with this dying dog a few seconds later. The burning wraith was truly cute. It floated in the air looking weak and sickly. Its form hadn't changed too much. Any changes would be hard to tell. Only its outer flames had clearly darkened by quite a bit. The most striking thing was at the back of this toy. It should be considered the back ... It towed a long, enormous tail. The heavily chained crow was still unceasingly performing suppression, slicing, and analysis upon the burning wraith. It seemed that the crow still needed quite a bit of time. Although Luo Nan was in soul form, he still let out a long breath from habit. He had finally resolved this ineffable annoyance. He could also bring this energy back to the plane of reality at last. Luo Nan naturally took notice of the alarms that rang through the entire ship. Without taking anything else into account, just the horrible and negative vocabulary term, mutant, was enough to explain quite a bit of the situation. But what was a Darksider life form? Luo Nan searched his memories to no avail. Right now, his surroundings had clearly underwent a change in circumstances. Not half the trace of a human could be seen down the long corridor, but the walls, floors, and several spots had already opened with narrow slits at some unknown time. A light white smoke could be seen emitting from the slits. Soon they pervaded the entire space. Oppressive footsteps echoed from the end of the corridor. 3 awe-inspiring exoskeleton armors assumed a combat formation. They advanced gradually within the misty smoke to push onwards. The corridor was completely empty aside from the misty smoke. Those facing the completely hidden thing looked as if they were facing an enormous enemy. It was as if there was an incorporeal monster that could slaughter them at any moment. Luo Nan suddenly formed a certain wonderful thought when he saw this scene. Incorporeal and formless, how could this group of people possibly deal with me? The mist increased in density within the corridor. Luo Nan's thoughts spurred a tiny action. He did not go about like a hurricane, with a horse-racing style like before. He pulled the half-dead burning wraith and avoided the corridor. He passed through the metal wall like a true ghost and entered the room next door. Then he rushed in the direction towards his main body. Chapter 13, The Darksider Species, Part 1-2. Luo Nan flew through a couple of rooms before discovering that the situation here was approaching that of the corridor. The rooms had little opened holes, with faint white smoke pouring out in an unending stream. The concentration here was even higher since the space was smaller. Many soldiers were entrenched within the smoke, all of whom were fully armed. Their facial expressions did not change. It was clear that they were extremely familiar with situations such as these. Of course, the smoke was certainly not poisonous. Due to the feeling of crisis from before, Luo Nan paid special attention to the effects of the smoke on his soul form. However, he was unable to detect any anomalies from observing his current state. He pushed his suspicions to the bottom of his heart. Then he concentrated on the sensation he would feel when passing through walls. So this was what it's like to have an out-of-body experience. He used various methods to pass through 7 or 8 walls, one after another, in order to further verify his state. His grandfather's formatting theory largely incorporated the study of metaphysics. During ordinary times, Luo Nan would study metaphysics, and he would study a bit of philosophy, ideology, and mystic arts from books. Turns out it wasn't a waste of time now that he was in his current state. Anyway, Luo Nan had researched and discovered this before in ancient records. From the perspective of his mystical arts knowledge, he was far from reaching the level of perfection with his current abilities. The death from 1,000 cuts experience he had from the coldness of the external world, when he left his body, gave him lingering fears lasting even now. He absolutely needed to rely on the external gas tank, the burning wraith, in order to maintain his cruising flight. Needless to say, the feeling between being pulled by a sled dog and riding a flying nimbus was completely different. There was a large distinction between being passive and taking control. Upon leaving his body, Luo Nan continued to purely rely on his willpower in order to conduct movement. He wasn't used to it, of course. He made quite a few redundant thoughts and actions several times. The most important thing was that he had yet to truly adapt to this soul form and observe this world. Since Luo Nan had deeply researched the nervous system in the past, he quickly discovered that the traditional five senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, feeling, had underwent a substantial change in their operational mechanisms on the soul plane. Audio and visual processes in this plane were really inefficient. Luo Nan was like a radar system under his soul form. He received various frequency bands at all times from the external world. The quantity of arriving information and signals were plentiful, already exceeding that of what the nervous system of a normal human body could receive and process. If Luo Nan were to cling to the body's usual process, the majority of these signals would automatically be washed away. Only a few signals would be inputted into his nervous system and processed, and the resulting format would be derived from the five senses after processing by his main body. Not even mentioning the issue with the majority of the frequency signals being swept away and wasted, there would exist a large distortion phenomena upon processing the signals due to his nervous system lacking real stimulation. He had already lost his sense of touch, to say the least. It seems that it would be better to process these signals directly. But if he were to compile and interpret the signals directly, a bigger problem would be formed. Luo Nan painstakingly collected what he sensed. He was immediately sent into a crashing tumble from the quantity of chaotic information in the surroundings. It appeared that adapting to life in the soul plane was quite the endless process. He had to change his thought process. The levels and range of his soul senses had broadened and increased. It was like he was a typical radio. It would be possible to hear a few interesting things amidst the static and noise. This was an extremely new experience for Luo Nan. He didn't mind expending a bit of energy in order to refine the process. Then a few intermittent keywords caught his attention at this very moment. Luo Nan had discovered a tiny deflection happening ahead of him from being stirred telepathically. In this circumstance, with his senses released, Luo Nan was assaulted by the sound of noisy clamor that had reflected off of several metal walls. Luo Nan unexpectedly felt a certain and bizarre familiarity upon receiving this noise. This was because the source of the noise was none other than the location of the detained Lion Yu, Lei Zhu Cheng, and the other rich kids. Luo Nan never expected that he would be able to observe the place he was once at using this sort of marvelous method. He was truly there, but the other people were completely clueless of it. It was a fantastic and genuine feeling. Lion Yu and the other rich kids did not know that a soul had been added to the mix. They argued and quarreled without end. This truly confirmed that all beings must search within themselves to find reason. Upon this change into being detained, the atmosphere of this group of rich kids had no good direction to turn to. The group of people lamented and complained from being prohibited drugs, from being detained, and from the series of events with Li Zhucheng. The atmosphere had turned unknowingly tense when they began to shout and argue. The circumstances were strange now that the mutant alarms rang and the smoke pervaded the air. It caused them to calm down for a bit. However, someone unknown threw out an opinion, starting a dispute once again. However, this time, the dispute contained some reason behind them. The focal point of the dispute was mutant. The ocean diffusion theory of mutants is undeniably proven. Don't waste your breath arguing with me. Your ears have been stuffed full of shit. How am I refuting the ocean diffusion theory? I'm just saying that there's been a lot of clear evidence that show a new source of the infection. The source is spewing from your mouth then. I'll F***CK. All mutant species began to emerge after the Third War. A large-scale infectious mutation phenomenon occurred on the world's original underlying living species. It was simply the most destructive, terrifying illustration within the discipline of biology. The most popular origin is said to be as follows. An opening to the depths of the Earth's crust occurred somewhere in the depths of the Pacific Ocean trenches. Or perhaps it was an inconceivable gate. And so the fatal infection came from the ocean through the ocean's biosphere to enter the fresh water system and terrestrial ecosphere. All vegetation, fungus, insects, animals, and even a small portion of the human population underwent various degrees of infection within a short few-year time frame. Living beings grew into forms of brutal, ruthless, and monstrous life forms under the catalyst of genetic mutation. Once they were. Right now, they were the apex predator of the food chain. Before the emergence of Quantum Corporation's Deep Blue platform, humanity was in dire straits facing these populations of terrifying species. They could only confine themselves in giant metropolises in defense, unable to return. Due to the topic having to do with survival, the topic of mutants was undoubtedly the most popular after the Third War. Nothing was hotter. Then explain to me, what is a Darksider life form? The Great Encyclopedia of Mutant Species was published in 2091 AD. IUC have the entire set. There are 17 overarching major species, with over 2,000 mutated types. Can you find the Darksider life form with those eyes of yours? All right then, if you believe your great encyclopedia is the Bible, I'm convinced that you're retarded. Wait. Finally, there was someone who came in to stop the fight. There's no need to get angry over this matter. A new species can pop out at any time with regards to mutants and the like. We're all just laymen here. We can't possibly make sense of this. Hey Tauster, your old man is a major funder of a laboratory in the countryside. Have you heard of this thing before? Liu Tao wore classical gold glasses and had a refined appearance. He could be considered a bit unique among this crowd. Normally he didn't talk much, but he had a certain humble and passionate charm. He had held himself back from speaking early on when he had heard the words Darksider life form. Now that he was given the chance to finally talk, he naturally laughed darkly. Darksider life form. A good entry point would be to consider it a specter. Chapter 13, The Darksider Species, Part 2-2. The room went a bit quiet. Then there was someone who laughed immediately. Spectre, do you mean a ghost? It's up to your interpretation. Anyway, from my point of view, the so-called Darksider life form is a sort of invisible and intangible thing that even floats around you to and fro. A spectre would be a more fitting description. Blare, Tauster, you're being super creepy, you ooze of death. A pretty trophy girl took the opportunity to look frail. Actually, the majority of people didn't really feel anything when Liu Tao had just talked. But through the embellishment of frailty and squeamishness from the pretty trophy girl, quite a few people began to have goosebumps. Some people twisted their heads to look at the surging smoke all around them. There was quite a bit of fear in their hearts. Contrary to belief, Liu Tao loved atmospheres like these the most. He pushed up his glasses and adapted a calm state. The facts are as follows. The industry hasn't published any papers nor raised any relevant concepts on the Darksider life form. Those who know more about it, aside from the various high-end laboratories, would be the military. We can see that the military has crossed paths with Darksider life forms several times from the way they have responded on this warship today. This is a good thing. The group of good-for-nothings were seriously bitter and angry when faced with Liu Tao's customary suspense-holding speech. Some people had already run out of patience. You can't see them, you can't touch them, and you can still research shit about them. You're not setting people up to be cheated of their money, right? F***CK off. Liu Tao smiled and cursed before finally he cut to the chase. The reason I mention the military is because the military has added the Darksider life form as a special type of mutant form. But the majority of research institutes have held a different theory. They believe the two are not the same. The most accepted description would also be somewhat of a conjecture. They believe that it may have been the cause of the Source Zero virus. It was still the same pretty trophy girl as before, however this time her response was genuine fear. And it wasn't just her, everyone had ugly expressions. The shadowy mutant could enshroud over each of their heads at any moment. Even rich kids were no exception. The Darksider life form was still able to draw their interest in research, even though they've already established that it was a mutant. However, if this warped monster mutant was what made everyone's lives hell, then everyone would run at first sight of it. Liu Tao spread his hand open. Don't you guys go scaring yourselves, okay? What I said was only the most preposterous conjecture of all. This thing has practically no resemblance at all to a virus. Even the conjecture of it being a living dark matter body is more reliable in comparison. The pretty trophy girl pouted at him for a moment, naturally entering into a teasing flirting style. Someone next to her cursed for a bit. Liu Tao felt he had been wronged, so he just simply stopped being mysterious and directly made a simple introduction. In summary, these Darksider life forms are like specters. They are a real existence, but you can't touch them nor can you see them. According to its nature as determined by laboratories, people have concluded that no contact occurs between it and common particles. Even electromagnetic waves won't create an active radiation in response. This implies that it's impossible to observe it directly under the vast majority of environments via conventional methods. Yeah, they won't exert any effects on this world's matter under normal circumstances. Someone laughed. Won't exert any effects? What sort of threat is that? Those aboard the warship are this tense and nervous. Is it all just to scare people? I'm saying that this only applies to ordinary circumstances. Have you ever thought about why this thing is called a life form? This is because this sort of thing possess the ability to interfere with the material plane under certain circumstances. And it possesses a certain goal. A goal. It can vary vastly, but according to statistics, nearly 40% of cases of interference occurrences are disturbances that stimulate the state of mind of living organisms. It makes people unable to focus their energy, makes them jittery, quick to temper, sensitive, and etc. The visiting Luo Nan to the side felt a stir of emotion. He sized up the burning wraith once more. This fellow still held its dying dog state at this moment, but what had happened beforehand perfectly validated Liu Tao's description. The Darksider life form has a very dangerous nature. Keep in mind that the parts we are unable to observe is meaningless to us. This is because the Darksider life form doesn't completely cross over with us. However, the parts we can discover will certainly be a threat. This is because they're trying to exert their influence at that very moment to disturb our plane. How does it disturb? It is very simple. A sentence is enough to describe it. It's called know yourself and know your enemy. Under ordinary circumstances, the Darksider life form doesn't intersect with us. But when it does try, it must first understand, access, and gather our information. A good comparison would be with an active radar. Normal radars don't turn on. No one would be able to discover its existence. However, the Darksider life form has the nature and aim to search. It will emit a beam for sure, exposing its own position. Luo Nan, who was observing the burning wraith at this time, suddenly went stupefied. He concentrated his attention in an unprecedented manner for what would follow. Of course, the Darksider life form is 1,000 times more hidden than a radar. They don't need to send out probing beams and the like. All they need to do is absorb the various frequency bands in the atmosphere, and it's fine. Then they can analyze and process it through an incomprehensible method to us. And this is our sole and only chance to be able to probe them. Liu Tao had spoken to the climax. His hand pointed at the surrounding mist. Do you see this shadow mist? A special particle has been released within this mist. These particles are very susceptible to various frequency bands in the atmosphere. As soon as they detect a direction in which a concentration of a relative change in nature has occurred, they can convey the relevant data to the central AI location via sensors that are all over the place. The central AI analyzes and determines the probability that a Darksider life form has appeared. Lion Yu, who had yet to open her mouth, also became interested. Her speciality just happened to be in the field of communications. Taoster, you're quite clear on the matter. Liu Tao was waiting for these words and immediately feigned a calm state. This kind of shadow mist battle tactic was developed and produced by a laboratory in the wilderness that was funded by my family. Upon reaching this point, naturally there were no lack of people who flattered him. Damn Taoster, you kept it super hidden. This technology will pay off big for us. It's not bad, not bad. Liu Tao was beaming with smiles. He felt quite invigorated inside. But the floating to the side Luo Nan had a different mood at this time. He looked around at the surrounding mist and went somewhat dumb at the moment. The somewhat quiet Lion Yu asked a question at this time. If it's this hard to discover a Darksider life form, how do you deal with one? At the present, only the burners. Actually, the discovery of the Darksider life form was a matter that happened after the Quantum Corporation pushed out their burners and Deep Blue platform. One can tell that the burners are highly sensitive to the Darksider life form from their combat experience. Only the burners, piloting the deep blue walkers, only via the means of an established archetype format, the burning fire format, can they do direct damage to the Darksider life form. Then, Lion Yu still wanted to ask questions, but a long beep sounded out and the exiting door to the room opened. The sliding metal door was still moving when an imposing figure burst in through the mist. Fine red laser dots filled the room in a chaotic fashion from the bulky weapon's frame. They streaked over the group of rich kids, causing them to be scared out of their wits. "Get down, get all the way down." The fierce and tough voice was magnified by the loudspeaker, piercing their ears. "Everyone, crawl towards the room's exit at once in succession. People will assist you outside." This person, who had just thrown himself into the room, was certainly a considerably valiant and experienced special figure. Unfortunately, he overlooked something from being in the military for a long time. This group of rich kids before his eyes really weren't experienced soldiers of the battlefield. They were already scared down to the bone from being faced with this sudden change in circumstances. Barely half a second passed. It was unknown who let loose their throat, but a piercing shriek flooded the entire room. The shriek spurred fear all over and around, like a tempest engulfing the hearts of each and every person. Chapter 14, Siege Hammer Part 1-2. It must be stated that Luo Nan had heartfelt thanks towards this fierce soldier who had charged in head first. This was because the soldier made a lapse in judgment, giving Luo Nan a chance to react. Luo Nan made a decision in the instant the shriek sounded out. He stimulated the burning wraith telepathically through the heavily chained crow, forcing the burning wraith to be stabbed awake from its dying dog state. The wraith stayed in place. Luo Nan's soul body left, following its original path, back to where Luo Nan had his soul separated from his main body. Luo Nan's decision was based on the worst-case scenario, with no luck factored in. As it turns out, his decision was made in the most timely manner. The military responded at lightning speed. As soon as they saw the nature of the screaming group of no-good rich kids, they completely lost hope that the rich kids would cooperate, and they immediately moved to action. In the room, the fierce soldier, who had thrown himself in head first, lifted up the large weapon in his hand. Dazzling electric flashes sprayed out amidst a booming sound. This was more effective than any order. All the rich kids immediately went prone, even though the shriek was all the more ear-piercing. There was no longer anyone standing up within the room aside from the fierce soldier. Everyone rushed towards the just-opened fence-like door, striving to be the first to leave and fearing to be the last. They rolled and crawled, squeezing over. The fierce soldier had taken control of the situation at last. He lifted his head that was enclosed by a completely sealed helmet. The translucent faceplate faced towards an empty space in the upper portion of the room. A typical person would see nothing in their field of vision save for the churning mist. But the fierce soldier clearly did not believe nothing was there. His right hand swept to the mode-switching button on his firearm, changing from a blank firing mode, which he had just used to scare people, to a single-shot mode. The muzzle of the gun rang muffled. Then a large flaming cloud rose up in the next moment within the semi-enclosed room. It enveloped practically the entire upper half of the room. It seemed like a miniblaze shell was shot haphazardly and impulsively. Right now Luo Nan was already at a distance of 2 rooms away. The straight-line distance was also over 10 meters. Anyway, since the chains and the burning wraith were integrated as a single body, it would be very hard to separate himself from the information over there. He had no choice but to continue heading back to his main body. Luo Nan's soul mind shivered the instant the flaming cloud leapt forth. The force of this attack contained actual substance. It followed the chains and conducted into Luo Nan. Even though Luo Nan was an incorporeal soul body, it was actually as if he was struck by a fist to the chest. It felt super horrible. He could confirm that the true destructive force absolutely did not stem from the brutal flames. This was because Luo Nan did not feel the conduction of heat at this moment, but rather a direct assaulting force arriving on the soul plane. Since these things happened to Luo Nan in this manner, it would be needless to say what would happen to the burning wraith that stayed idle within the room. It had just awakened from its dying dog state and was still somewhat sluggish. The red cloud exploded in its face, crossing over the divide between reality and the imaginary to affect its body. In an instant, the burning wraith's body was actually bombed to shrink by a factor. It had clearly taken damage. This sort of blaze shell type ammunition was clearly produced specifically to target the Darksider life form. The effects were instantaneous. However, reloading the ammunition wasn't necessarily easy. After the fierce soldier had unleashed his attack, he retreated backwards and began to reload at the same time. He was unable to complete this task, even though a bit of time had already passed. But if things weren't as it seemed, and if Luo Nan would believe that there was an opening, then that would be far too naive of Luo Nan. A single poorly skilled man would be unable to withstand the great force of many men. After the first blaze shell attack was unleashed, shells arced inside the room from outside one after another. At least 5 of the same type of shell ammunition entered and exploded within the room. Flaming clouds surged and raged for a moment. The temperature of the entire room had to have increased by 20 degrees or higher at the very least. The sudden increase in temperature appeared to be quite frightening. Actually, it was in fact meaningless. It further proved that the destructive capabilities of the ammunition was diverted more to the place outside the normal plane. The left-behind-in-room burning wraith provided ample information. This storming blaze shell not only directly assaulted on the soul plane, it even had a viscous function. The burning wraith tried to escape when it suffered the attacks, but it was as if a jar of glue had been toppled in the surrounding space, causing the wraith to move with great difficulty. Perhaps it was a strong and invisible magnetic field. Luo Nan continued to ponder as he continued to retreat. Right now, he could clearly see that the military had already developed an entire process of effective methods in order to deal with the Darksider life form. He really didn't know how things would end if he had stayed behind. The manner in which Luo Nan made his retreating route showed that he put some consideration into it. He had an approximate explanation from Liu Tao's introduction. The shadow mist's capturing mechanism towards the Darksider life form wasn't completely accurate. It was a kind of computational method that lies in probability. In other words, there was a high likelihood that the military didn't know the Darksider life form's true shape, true mass, and its relationship between people. Luo Nan had ditched the just-captured burning wraith without the slightest hesitation. With the burning wraith attracting fire, Luo Nan could be considered safe, at least so far. However, at this moment, the bound-to-room burning wraith was finally pushed to its vicious nature upon receiving repeated attacks. Thousands of holes were already made in its devilish body when it suddenly pulled back, Its originally incorporeal body increased its degree of substance. There was even a split second where a clearer silhouette could be seen. The heavily chained crow was still fastened together with the burning wraith. However, Luo Nan was unable to distinguish what it was out of the information that the crow sent back. He did not know what it was. He just felt that it was a certain terrible beast. The incorporeal and fierce beast faced the sky and roared in the next moment. Several spirit waves containing actual substance rippled forth, filling the room in a flash and penetrating the metal walls to rapidly spreading. From the moment the gunshot rang, the burning flaming cloud above the group of rich kids' heads simply scared the rich kids into pissing their pants. All of them were shrieking, "Save me," right now. Some people, even completely, lacked the strength to crawl. Luckily, the support soldiers outside the room saw through their nature. They changed their tactics, promptly reached out their hands, and hauled the kids out of there. But the burning wraith had howled outright at this time. Actually, no one heard anything, but each and every person was unable to suppress a deathly fear from exploding in their minds under the engulfment of spirit waves. In this instant, at least 3 people pissed their pants, and some people even directly passed out. But on a different plane, through the chains, through the burning wraith, Luo Nan could actually see something strange begin to ooze and spurt out of the pores between the nose and mouth from this group of rich kids that had collapsed when faced with fear. Countless dark, red glowing dots floated up looking like the downward drifting dust under the light of the sun. Luo Nan could clearly see a marvelous energy within the dark and dim glimmer. This was like a strange spore, and its source was none other than the dozen or so shivering and trembling rich kids outside the room. Practically each of them had this kind of dark red spore spurt from their body to interweave amongst each other. The spores formed, as a whole, an airy glowing mist that covered the entire room. The glowing mist increased in concentration at extreme speed. Great quantities of spores exited and interweaved at all times from inside and outside their bodies. The density was simply a burning flame of doom. Finally, the glowing mist reached its certain limit in density. It surged forth on its own accord, drowning the burning wraith within. Only a vague outline could be seen. At first glance, its inverted form was the same as the sketch upon which Luo Nan had initially drawn it. The outlines and the like were only more detailed. There were many places that had already departed from the composition of Luo Nan's drawing to become extremely abstract. For instance, a strange symbol seemed to be increasing in size upon its body. The burning wraith locked onto a target the instant the symbol emerged. The fierce soldier, who had always stood on the frontmost line, was suited in an exoskeleton armor. It was as if he had suffered an electric assault. The fierce soldier immediately fell backwards, violently twitching. A faint smoke leapt forth from the material body, then the smoke immediately dissipated. Chapter 14, Siege Hammer Part 2-2. Luo Nan felt a sense of familiarity towards the series of events that happened in the room. The dreadful howl was a near reconstruction of Luo Nan's experience on the overpass, and something of an even rawer nature was revealed on the soul plane. It was clear that the others were ignorant of the spores and the like from their facial expressions. As for the fallen fierce soldier who was met with misfortune, Luo Nan was quite empathetic towards him. This was because Luo Nan had experienced the same shock of incorporeal doom when he had been torn out of his body through the pierced opening, forcefully having his soul be expelled out. Right now it seemed like this attack was a siege hammer that applied directly on the soul plane. The corporeal body of the material plane would be unable to withstand the force from the falling hammer which strikes the soul directly. It was filled with the aura of the mystic arts. The fierce soldier clearly didn't have the ability to have an out-of-body experience. The situation turned terrible all of a sudden. Luo Nan stirred telepathically. He had no contention nor animosity with the military combat personnel. This death was caused by the mysterious and unfathomable Darksider life form. He didn't wish for this to happen. He sent his first command to the post-combat burning wraith after a moment's hesitation. The burning wraith was a bit sluggish within the room. At this moment, the desolate flames that drove the burning wraith had already burned all the binding forces away completely, allowing the wraith to have a complete return of freedom and a sharp increase in strength. But Luo Nan's command was channeled through the chains directly down to the burning wraith's core level. It would be hard for the wraith to have the strength to refuse Luo Nan. The burning wraith emitted a bloody ray that curled up the smoke, which had scattered from the fierce soldier's internal body and forcefully stuffed the smoke back in. It orbited in a circle in the air. The continuously exploding flaming clouds appeared to do nothing to it. The dark glowing red flames swept across and fled the room, and from a distance of over 10 meters away, Luo Nan's soul body caught up to the burning wraith without a sound at this very moment. According to Liu Tao's words, the military used shadow mist in order to probe the Darksider life form. They observed the data of each frequency band to see whether or not a changing deviation of disturbance towards the plane of reality had occurred. Luo Nan didn't understand what sort of computational methods they used, but he did know that his current state would be like being a duck driven to a porch. The burning wraith had pushed him to a state outside his normal ability. The reason why Luo Nan was able to maintain this state for such a long time was likely due to his self-formatting. He was a soul out of a body. Naturally, he carried the deviation towards disturbing reality. Or perhaps he was mixed with the darkness and would no longer be classified as a human. What would happen then? If things were this way, then there would be a high probability that he would naturally be considered a signal source within the shadow mist. He would act in a self-defeating way like the burning wraith. He didn't know who would capture him at the very end. It would be impossible for him to create a diversion. He could only succeed by using underhanded means. He guided the chains and maintained a distance that was neither too near nor too far. He stayed behind the burning wraith the whole way, adjusting his route cautiously at the same time. Although the burning wraith of the present fell on a plane in which the visions of ordinary people could not reach, its powerful and frequent disturbances on the material plane caused it to look like a burning luminous flame within the detection system of the military. Its vicious aura was bottomless. The well-trained soldiers outside only lagged behind by approximately half a second. They then changed the directions of their gun barrels and used the special flaming cloud to seal off the area of the corridor. But the burning wraith unleashed that terrifying roar again, absorbing the frightened emotions of the soldiers for its own use via some bizarre method. Its strength increased sharply, causing Luo Nan to have to exert some effort to control it. It would be further needless to say what would happen to the soldiers that could only rely on their special equipment to face the attack. Even though the flaming cloud pervaded half the corridor, the burning wraith just moved wherever it wanted to move. Once in a while, it would shoot a burst of siege hammers. Being under Luo Nan's continual control, no injuries on the level of the first attack occurred this time. However, those who were hit fell to the ground and passed out. It would be hard for them to regain consciousness. A bizarre situation was formed due to facing an incorporeal enemy and due to the inexplicable reason for why people were collapsing. It put the emotions of the soldiers to the ultimate test of true will. Although these soldiers had underwent harsh training, they were unable to follow their drills and maintain a continuous volley of firepower. Frantic thoughts of fear spurred in their hearts. This was inevitable after all. Confronting the burning wraith was like trying to undo a deathly complicated knot. The quantity of the bizarre spores in the corridor increased rapidly once again. It was unknown whether it came from the bodies of the collapsed rich kids or from the bodies of the soldiers engaged in combat, but a large quantity of spores floated up, infected, and interchanged. A terrifying, overturning demonic force pushed down upon everyone present like an avalanche. Elite soldiers had formed a combat formation, firing off one after another in rhythm, and an emerged disorder could already be seen in the formation. 1, 2, 3, 7, 8. Including the soldier who had collapsed within the room, there were 9 well-trained elite soldiers suited in advanced exoskeleton armors. They formed a combat squad that was sufficient to contend with powerful and formidable mutants in the wilderness. But under the fierce might of the burning wraith, they actually lacked all ability to retaliate back. Luo Nan's mood was a bit complex as he observed this scene. He had just been a criminal suspect detained forcefully by the police this morning. He could only act as an obedient grandchild when faced with the organization's might. But in a short few hours, he already came to possess the dominating force and ability to smash the military's elite squad of soldiers in front of him. This force was both powerful and terrifying, unfathomable yet concrete. But he could extrapolate at least a speck of how hard-pressed the planetary government was when confronting the wilderness, when confronting the mutants, when confronting Darksider life forms from the scene before his eyes. Luo Nan was not a good patriotic kid who was concerned with the fate of his nation. Yet he was able to remember a saying: everyone was only 300 kilometers away from the wilderness. Each and every person faced the threat of mutants on this planet. And from what he saw today, this threat was far greater than what the government and media normally made public. In the end, Luo Nan did not have a gloomy temperament. He quickly recovered his spirits from melancholy. He slightly restrained the ferocity of the burning wraith and simultaneously revised his route. He was about to continue passing through walls in order to return to his body. But an agitated response came from the burning wraith in the next moment. Luo Nan also felt an indescribable sensation just slightly later. His attention shifted, and he actually heard the muffled rippling of footsteps. The beautiful and clear color of azure seawater was at the end of the long corridor. It turned the corner and approached closer step by step. It was the same sort of exoskeleton armor, except the head portion was a bit more planar, with several sharp angles and corners on the external helmet. It was once considered the most manliest of exoskeleton designs, but in the eyes of Luo Nan, it was like a praying mantis that had leapt in for the kill. The reflections off of every plane, edge, and corner possessed the penetrating force of a knife's edge. This completely sealed helmet tilted back, and a low hissing sounded forth. At the same time, the neck and shoulder, chest and stomach, ribs and limb positions of the exoskeleton armor morphed slightly. The entire armor seemed to have expanded by a factor in an instant. Then bizarre symbols began to appear on the painted surface of the armor. Smooth lines, circular arcs, hyperbolas, and other various shapes appeared. Intricate electric arcs seemed to leap and circulate upon the exterior of the armor. Yet after careful examination, how could it be electricity? It was clearly a layer of intricate interweaving flames, stuck dead fastened to the external layer of the armor. That armor was deep blue like the ocean's water. There was only the slight flickering of the dazzling glowing flames. Deep Blue Walker, a form of the archetype format. Several additional thoughts leapt continuously within Luo Nan's mind. Finally, there was one relevant to the situation. Format of fire. Before this thought could vanish, the Deep Blue Walker approached forward with large strides. Translucent flames sprayed from its body. The flames were crystal clear, and they pushed and filled the corridor like a silent wave of water. The flames interweaved with the space-filling flaming clouds, which had been released by the military to become one. An astonishing reaction was generated in a flash. That's a wrap for this installment. Thank you all for watching and supporting Lord of the Stories. If you enjoyed this tale, please hit the like button, share it, and subscribe for more amazing stories. You can also explore other series updated daily in our playlists. Have a fantastic day and see you in the next episode.